The good old clap, take one.
That's right.
How many of you knew what you wanted to be when you were 7 years old? I did. I wanted to be world champion.
Hey, is there honesty involved in this podcast? Can we be honest?
You can shut your fucking lips.
And then I'll just say, put them up, what? Let's go.
He's like, you look too pretty on the wave. Get ugly.
We can talk about DMT if you want.
I thought we were boxing.
All right, so we have a special bonus episode of the lineup today, one that I'm really excited about. For 2023, we have the pleasure of welcoming Mitch Salazar as our friend and co-host for a number of episodes this season. You know, our listeners, they're going to know Mitch from the CT broadcast where he commentates, from his prior life where he competed as a qualifying series surfer, originally hailing from Mazatlan. And he's still a damn good surfer. He's so fun to talk about surfing with. Really excited about this season with you. And we're going to dive obviously more into your background, and our listeners will get to know you a lot more in this season's episodes. But today's episode is special, and it is focused on the recently launched Vissla CT Shaper Rankings for the 2023 season.
Yeah, Dave, excited to be here. Really excited to be part of the lineup program. And as you mentioned, last year this was already a success, and it kind of shows you the development of shapers worldwide and how they're really attributing to their competitor success too. If you look at the success that the last three pipeline champions have had at the beginning of the season, they've all ridden different boards. Italo in 2019 riding a Timmy Patterson. 2021 was John Florence on a Paisel. And last year, Kelly just broke the myth of Slater Designs or Firewires not working there. And all of a sudden, he's a champion against a local boy, Seth Moniz. So I think shapers have really come into their own, and they're obviously manufacturing some of the best boards that we've ever seen.
Totally. And you know, this is a new program. I think, you know, you're a surfer, I'm a surfer, our listeners are surfers. We all, you know, we're all kind of obsessed with equipment on some level, you know, and we all want to know who's shaping for who's got the hot hand, what's working. And this is a conversation that all of us have. It's already happening on the broadcast. So, you know, the Vissla CT Shaper Rankings, the idea is to kind of structure that conversation and gamify it in a way that it's celebrating all the time and money and energy and investment that those shapers put into the world's best surfers year in and year out. And so, you know, the way it's going to work is not dissimilar to F1's Constructor Cup, where not everyone gets points. You have to finish in the top 10 in F1 races to collect points. In the Vissla CT Shaper Rankings, you have to finish in the quarterfinals or better. Your quarterfinal or better finish, the points that the surfer gets, are then going to go to the shaper on whose board they were surfing. And then the ranking will be a combined men's and women's ranking, and we'll find out who sits atop of it at the end of the season.
I like it. It's really fun, and I like that it forces the surfers to get a quarterfinal finish or better too. I think that's kind of what the breakdown of the actual CT is anyways. So for me as a fan, as somebody who still works on the broadcast part of it too, it's really exciting for me to really see these surfers not only showcase their talent, but obviously what they've been working on in the shaping bay with their own shapers. And as surfers, they're always looking to develop their own skills through those personal shaper experience as well. So looking at guys like Caio Belli, who made back-to-back semifinals in the first two events, I'm really looking for those kind of performances starting at Pipeline, Dave.
Totally. And you know, like, measuring shaper performance, as we said, it's been a conversation probably since time immemorial on tour. This program, again, it kind of creates a structure around it. And in working with the shapers who shape for the CT surfers and the surfers on tour and identifying, okay, well, how would this formula work? Should we count every single place? Should we only count, you know, the top two finishers, et cetera? And we kind of landed in that space where any surfer that makes the quarterfinals or better, whether it's someone like Sharp Eye, who has a very, very big team, or someone like a Patterson, who maybe only has a single surfer on tour, that felt like the most democratic way to both measure shaper performance as well as just investment in team as well. And so, it's going to be interesting. And it'll be interesting to see what happens as the surfers move through the different venues and the different parts of the year, which boards are getting a little bit more attention, who who's maybe switching programs and where these different programs are like in their life cycle, like they're rising, they're following, they're rebuilding, like what's happening with them and why. And I think this program's a really good vessel for conversation, and I'm excited to use the lineup to talk about it as well.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, I think what the Vissla CT Shaper Rankings does more than anything, it highlights those shapers that maybe don't have as much success, but the success that they do have, it's enough for them. You look at Brisa Hennessy's success last season, finishing number 5 in the world, but she did win a CT event. Sunset Beach, second stop, a wave that she knows very well. What did it do for both TNC, Town and Country, and for Glenn Payne, too? It boosted their morale, it boosted their sales, and next thing you know, they're back on the scene. Same thing goes for John Pizell and the success that he's had with John Florence in both his championship years and off tour as well during his free surfs. We're talking about some of the biggest names in surfing that have not only developed their careers through the CT, but are continuing to do so because of the Vissla CT Shaper Rankings too.
Yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun. This is exciting. We're going to get to a few more observations here in the back half of this special bonus episode. But first, we're going to take a quick break to get a word in from our sponsors, and we'll be right back.
Welcome back to the lineup, everybody. We're talking about the Vissla CT Shaper Rankings here. Mitchell Salazar with Dave Prodan. And Dave, let's go through a couple of observations that we both have going into 2023. The start of the season, starting at Pipeline, then going into Sunset Beach. Tell me your first one.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think the first one is just, doing an audit of directionally which shapers the 51 CT surfers are using to start the season, right? We got 34 on the men, 17 on the women, not counting the event wildcards. But, in looking at that directional breakdown of who the CT surfers are starting with, the shaper teams to me kind of fall into 3 broad tiers. You got tier 1, which are the bigger programs. Sharp Eye's got 11 surfers, Mayhem's got 7, and then Channel Islands and DHD have 6 apiece. And then tier 2 is sort of the mid-sized teams. You got Takoro and Pizell with 3 each, and then Firewire, Pang, and JS with 2 each. And then tier 3 are sort of the lone wolves. You got Sparrow, OHP, Bradley, Borst, Stamps, Cabianca, Patterson, Rusty, and Smith. They've all got one team rider to their program to start the year. And of course, that's just the start. There's always going to be adjustments. Surfers are going to use whatever equipment they feel is best, and things may have changed even by the time this podcast airs. But I do think it's interesting that those 18 odd shapers supporting the world's best surfers don't all take the same approach. And of course, they wouldn't, as they have their own unique approaches to business and board building. But I do think it will be interesting to see how those different approaches play out over the course of this season through the structure of the Vissla CT Shaper Rankings. Do you put your chips on as many squares as possible, or do you go all in on just a few or even one surfer? So that's kind of my first observation, just in looking how this season's going to start out.
Pretty good observation right there, Dave. I mean, I think the thing that I agree with you on the most is that you want to divide between tiers, just as you do with fantasy. And what that does, it allows you to kind of divide things in a way that, okay, this is the person that's having most success, the person that's having medium success, and the lowest amount of success. But that's also because a certain shaper, a certain surfboard manufacturer could have way less surfers on tour. You look at Samuel Pupo. He's sticking to his guns and staying on his dad's boards for the rest of his life, it seems. OHB, doing great, but only has one surfer on tour. And his older brother, Miggy, decided to do the switch to Sharp Eye, and look at the success that he's having so far. Number 6 in the world last year, won his first CT event over in Tahiti, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to guarantee Sharp Eye that number 1 spot that it had last season. So what I'm interested to see are those people that have less surfers on tour, see how successful they can be in the first 5 events specifically, because you don't want to get into that mid-year cutoff not having a surfer in the second back of the year.
Well, that is exactly what happened to maybe one of the most celebrated board building programs of all time in JS Industries, right? Relegation line hits in 2022, and they don't have a single surfer on the men's or women's tour for the back half of the season, which it kind of like blew my mind, given the pedigree of that program, the team that they'd assembled over the last several decades, and just the quality of the craft. Now they've got, Ryan Callanan and Ramsey Bukiam coming back on tour, both amazing surfers, both goofy footers, thank God. And I'm excited to see like what happens there. But you're completely right. Like looking at those different tiers and kind of seeing how teams within those tiers match off against each other is pretty cool.
And just to reiterate what you said about JS, it's incredible what happened. I mean, they went to being maybe the top pinnacle of surfboard shaping for maybe 10, 15 years, especially when Andy Irons was on top. You had Bruce in there too. And now it just seems like, despite the success that Australians have had competitively on the championship tour, and it goes back decades, with the success that Mark Richards had in the 70s, Tom Carroll in the 80s, then you had Aki, Mick, Joel, everybody going into the 2000s, 2010s. What happened? Other regions of the world got better too. And that comes with success on the championship tour. Your sales go up because those surfers are doing well. And next thing you know, everybody's wanting to surf for a specific surfboard manufacturer, Dave.
What's the Nathaniel Hawthorne quote? Families are always rising and falling in America. Maybe we can repurpose it with, board building programs are always rising and falling in the Vissla CT Shaper rankings. So I'm excited to see what happens with JS and all of them this season. Mitch, what's your first observation looking in to the 2023 season?
How quickly can people do well at both Pipeline and at Sunset Beach? Because to me, out of the first 5 events, I think that's really where you need to be doing well. You don't want to go into the Australian leg knowing that you need a quarterfinal or semifinal finish to requalify. So how can those people that ended up outside of the top 5, like Rusty Surfboards with Caillou Belly, who had 2 semifinals in the first 2 events, how can they capitalize on waves that they've been successful at before, replicate it now? So that's just one observation. I think another one, just to kind of go off of that too, my second observation, Dave, would be to not only get that result, but then eventually get a win too, because that's going to solidify you going into the second half.
Absolutely. And it's interesting when you put the Vissla CT Shaper rankings through the prism of the redesign schedule, right? Where you have 5 pretty heavy water waves. It's not what it was for a couple decades where it starts out relatively playful at, Snapper Rocks or Duranbah. You're getting shot out of a figurative cannon at Pipeline, then this deep water break of Sunset Beach, the Portuguese pipeline of Super Tubos, and then Bells and Margaret River. And those are very serious waves, and it'll be interesting to see what happens with the equipment as it goes into there. And that kind of tracks with my second observation, which is the recognition of specialty shapers at certain locations. And I know we kind of touched on this already, but for example, this was a huge topic of conversation that came up both with the surfers and the shapers when we were developing the program. And that was the use of regional shapers by the world's best surfers when they're in places like Hawaii. For example, Jadson Andre, he rides for 1DA Surfboards by shaper Gavin Upton, but he will only ride Tokoros in Hawaii. Similar with Gabriel Medina, he rides for Cabianca everywhere. He's on Tokoros in Hawaii. And we saw this last year. I think we're going to see it again this year. Shapers like Glenn Pang, Eric Arakawa, Tokoro, Bushman, etc. They seem to be the shapers of choice for a number of CT surfers when it comes to Hawaii for Pipeline and Sunset Beach. And then we've seen similar usage at places like Margaret River and Tahiti. Mitch, when you were doing the QS, I'm curious, what kind of approach did you have to your own equipment? Was it a singular shaper for every single stop, or did you tap into the local special sauce in certain places?
Dave, my story might be a little depressing, but I didn't have enough money to kind of tap into the different resources that were available at certain locations. But I was one of those guys that if I found a good board that was a great QS board, and I'm talking about something that works both a beach break, point break, reef break, I'd stick to it, and I'd stick to that same model. And I've kind of always been a big mayhem guy. So to me, it's always been about the driver, sub-driver, and now I'm riding, I'm a little heavier. I'm riding the Uber XL, which is a great overall board. But I used to be a big Channel Islands guy too. Now I tend to ride the Happy Every Day from them. It's a great board. But when I was living on Oahu, I had a few years where I was living on the North Shore with one of my best friends. I tended to ride Tokoro boards. And some of my most successful results on both the QS and the junior scene were because I was riding his boards in heavier surf. And I can definitely attribute to the success that both Gabe and Mick Fanning could have had over on the North Shore, those being some of the best boards that I've ever ridden in my life. So I would definitely say that is an excellent observation, and I think it's going to pan out for a lot of these surfers.
You know, you started that comment with, yeah, it's your story was a little depressing, but I'm happy you shared that with us because even on the CT, not all surfers are treated equally by shapers, right? Like some shapers are going, we will give you boards, we will pay you to ride our boards. And then some shapers are like, look, you might be a world-class surfer, but we don't have space for you on the team. You can buy boards, you know, we'll give you a good rate. Or, you know, there are kind of rare occasions that come up, and certainly when they do in the future, I hope we get to talk about it, where the shapers will just have to say, can't shape for you. You know, rivalries happen at the elite level. Everyone gets very sort of proprietary and protective about their group, their shaper, their boards, their team. And there have been instances over the course of surfing history where the surfer has told their shaper, do not shape for my competitor. And the shapers had to abide by that request.
Yep. No, and
what's your?
Okay. I was actually about to say that would be my third observation: is that some people are limited to what they can ride at certain locations, and I think specifically in the first 5 events, it's imperative for you to be on the best equipment that you can possibly have at those events that are very specific to certain styles of surfing. You look at John. The success that he's had at both Bells Beach and Margaret River, it's because he's had adequate heavy water surfboards that have been great for those waves. And obviously they've contributed to his success, but it comes down to the surfer as well. If you don't have a kind of open mentality and you know what you're looking at certain locations, you're not going to succeed at all, Dave. And I think getting off to a great start at Pipeline, knowing how Gabe does there, riding those Tokoro boards, and then eventually transitioning to the Caviancas, it's a huge deal for him. But he goes in with an open mindset. So that would be my third observation.
I love it. I love it. And, you know, my third observation heading into 2023 is Marcio Zuvi and Sharpeye. And I think, honestly, and I know people have been talking about it, but even so, I still think it's been one of the more underreported stories in surfing. Just how impressive that program build out has been over the last several years and the success that build out has wrought, you know. So the questions I have looking at Marcio and, you know, Brendan and Yufu and the whole Sharpeye program heading into 2023 are, you know, can you keep a team that size happy? Can it, if you do, deliver the same level of success? Have you reached the ceiling in terms of success, or can you go higher? And then at the same time, there are all these insurgent teams in a way. You know, what are their plans? Are they developing more talent coming up through the Pro Juniors QSCS? Or are they going after talent on other teams, maybe on the Sharpeye team? And that to me is kind of exciting. And that's why these rankings are exciting, to kind of monitor event to event to see what's happening, what's working. Are we on this trajectory where Sharpeye is going to create this dynastic era in sort of surfing dominance, not unlike, you know, Channel Islands or Mayhem or DHD or JS have had in the past? Or are we going to see a quick challenge in 2023? And I'm really fired up about that.
I think you make an excellent point, first of all, with whether or not they can replicate the success that they had. Because if you look on the men's side, 3 out of the 5 finalists were riding Sharpeyes. And the world champion ended up riding a Sharpeye surfboard too. So it goes to show you that the product's there. The surfing's there. But whether or not you can keep up that consistency year to year, especially keeping your surfers content, is a whole nother story. You know, having somebody that has been dominant like Felipe over the course of the last, 15 months, ended up second in the world the year before, last year's champion. But Jack Robinson's right on his heels. And I'm telling you, this kid is coming for that title this year. And now you have somebody like both Joanne DeFay on the women's side. And I also really like the performances that we've seen from a lot of the young surfers coming up, like Teresa Bonvalo, who's going to be an injury replacement in the event. She rides Chili's for the most part. Those kind of equipment
First Chili
choices
we've had on tour in a while, right?
In a long time. Those kind of equipment choices, are they going to work out or not? And are those surfers going to be content with their equipment and their results. I like your point, Dave.
That is the interesting thing about surfboard shaping at this level, right? Like James Chile Surfboards, people talk about those boards in like whispers and in like dark corners of like the championship tour. Like, Andy Irons rode those boards and those were some of the best boards we've ever seen, and there are these amazing shapers who may go a few years without having anyone on tour, and all of a sudden, bang, they're there, and so I'm really excited, looking at the top 5 finishers from last year, just as we close this special bonus episode out. Sharp Eye was so dominant, men's and women's performances. But then you had a pretty close grouping after him between Mayhem, DHD, Glenn Pang, and Peisel, and so you had the top 3 dominated by the larger size teams, but then, the 4 and 5 were occupied by those mid-sized teams. And maybe to close out, Mitch, like your predictions for the Billabong Pro pipeline on the men's and women's side, who were a couple of surfers you're watching that you think are going to perform well, and what boards are they riding for the edification of the listeners?
Well, I think in terms of surfboard manufacturers, I think Sharp Eye is still going to have a great year. I just think that the talent that they have on their team is superb. Really excited to see the return of Gabe at Pipeline too. Only surfed 3 events last year, and he was really close to qualifying for the finals on the rate that he was at. But I think Gabe's going to have a great year. To me, he's really the person that's gunning for the World Championship. I expect him to do very well. I think Kanoe Garashi is going to do excellent there. I talked to him the other day, and he said that he was in very good spirits. He's excited for 2023. And obviously seeing John Florence compete there on the men's side is going to be amazing too. Really expect him to do well. On the women's side, though, I think it's a whole nother deal. Based off of what we saw last year at Pipe, I don't necessarily think that certain surfers are going to replicate the same amount of success. I think you have young talent coming up, like Sakura, who's on her 2nd year now. She's a local surfer. She charges. I love Caitlin Simmers, and I love Molly Picklum. I think they're going to be underrated, and I think a couple of Mayhems are going to be looking out on the podium too, Dave.
I like it. And let's not forget, we didn't actually get to see the now reigning 8-time women's world champion Stephanie Gilmore at Pipe last year. She was out with COVID. And in one of the things I've noticed about Steph, who's a DHD team rider and has been for a long time, and I may be biased because my career at the ASP is sort of ran pretty parallel with hers, just in terms of the time that I was here and the time that she was winning, which felt forever. So I might be a bit biased, but the surfing world loves to kind of what's the word? Like expedite narratives in surfing, where we're like, okay, Steph's won a bunch of world titles, like Tyler's winning them now, Carissa's winning them now. All right, Steph, stage left. And to me, like Steph, when she wasn't competing for world titles for the last few years, it was never about a talent shift. It was always just like motivation, and so I feel like when her talent's on, she's still the best in the world. And I honestly think going from 5th to 1st and winning that 8th world title is kind of, the fangs are back out, and so my prediction on the women's side is, man, if she wins a bunch of CT events this year en route to like a 9th world title, I wouldn't be shocked, because I think the talent's still there. But on both sides, I'm excited. I'm super excited for, Gabe and John to come back, and they've drawn each other in round 1 at Pipe along with Leonardo Fioravanti. So yeah, it's all shaping up.
I'm glad that you mentioned Steph, though, because the fact that she went from winning the world championship all the way from number 5 to number 1, she had to surf the most amount of matches out of everybody that day, including the men. And let me tell you that it was not easy to surf that day at lower trestles either. It wasn't fun. It was difficult. It was messy. And she had one goal on her mind, and that was to be 8-time world champ that day. And I think if we're seeing a lot of waves at backdoor specifically, she's going to be very dangerous. She's a great barrel rider. Those rides at backdoor tend to run a lot like snapper rocks behind the rock. So it's going to be really fun to watch her there.
Totally agree. Well, Mitch, thanks for doing this. Thank you for coming on. Lineup listeners, we're going to be a lot of Dave and Mitch this season. It'll be exciting. Appreciate you coming on for this special bonus episode, and appreciate Vissla for coming on, supporting this. The Vissla CT Shaper Rankings. You can find the updated rankings on worldsurfleague.com and the WSL app. We're going to be talking about as much as possible. And yeah, if you see these videos on social media or YouTube, weigh in, give us your opinions on what's working with the world's best shapers, what's not. We're going to be weighing in too, and it's going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. I appreciate it. Let's just throw our predictions for this year's winner while we're at it. I'm going to go ahead
I like it.
And just say it's going to be Sharp Eye again. I think Sharp Eye is going to dominate again this year.
Oh man, you put me on the spot here. I will say, I'll just say something different for the purposes of being different. But I kind of like the way DHD's looking. Rejuvenated Stephanie Gilmore, Molly Picklum, who you mentioned. On the men's side, you got Ethan Ewing and Connor O'Leary. I think you're going to have people challenging for wins, and I think you're going to have a balanced men's and women's program. They've also got Liam O'Brien, Isabella Nichols. I think they're going to do some damage across the season in the quarterfinals or better, and I think they're going to be right there challenging at the end of the year. So I'll say DH.
It's a great pick. It's going to be a great season, Dave.
All right, man. Well, we'll check in very, very soon. I think we've got another episode coming up soon, but appreciate you, Mitch. And we'll talk soon.
Thanks, Dave. Appreciate it.